I knew something was wrong before I even got out of the cab, because there was a minivan in my driveway, a little blue bike tipped over my yard, and curtains in my front window that sure as hell did not belong to me. You ever come home thinking about a hot shower in your own bed, only to realize somebody else has been living your life while you were gone? That's the kind of moment that makes your stomach drop so fast it feels like your bones miss a step. I've been gone 6 months, overseas, doing consulting work tied to my old service life. Nothing glamorous, nothing like the movies. Just long days, dust, routine, and the quiet kind of pride that comes from still being useful. The whole flight home, all I could think about was my house, my chair by the window, my coffee mug with the chipped handle, the creak in the hallway floor, right outside the bedroom. Normal things. Small things. The things you miss when you spend enough time sleeping in places that never feel like yours. I bought that house after years of saving, and I loved it from the start. It sat on one of the better lots in the neighborhood, not because it was flashy, but because the evening light hit the back of the house just right. Big oak trees. Quiet street, one of those cul-de-sacs where people smiled a lot when you first moved in. At least that's how it looked. Didn't take long to figure out smiles in a neighborhood like that can be real thin. The first person to make that clear was Karen, president of the HOA, self-appointed guardian of property values. Human alarm bell for things nobody else on earth cared about. She had a way of walking up to you like she was arriving at a crime scene, always holding some paper, some clipboard, some rule book, like she'd been chosen by heaven to save the suburbs from slightly imperfect grass. She had a problem with everything I did. My lawn was a little too long one week. By her measuring, not mine. My holiday lights were too informal. My welcome mat, and I'm not making this up, was too bold in tone for the entry aesthetic to the block. Who talks like that about a doormat? But I kept my mouth shut. I smiled. I nodded. I fixed what it needed fixing, just to avoid the headache. I'd spent enough of my life dealing with conflict when it actually mattered. I wasn't about to burn energy fighting a woman who treated mailbox placement like national security. And, truth be told, I knew I stood out. I was the only black man on that cul-de-sac, and you learn, after a while, how often just following the rules somehow gets enforced a little harder on some people than others. Karen never said anything outright. She didn't have to. Some people can make you feel unwelcome with a smile so tight it looks stapled on. Still, I handled my business. Ipaid Malasia Duas. I kept the place immaculate. When I got notice that I'd be leaving for 6 months, I did everything right. I informed the HOA in writing. I left updated contact information. I hired a landscaping company to come by twice a week. I had my mail forwarded where I could. I checked every box I could think of, because I figured if you prepare well enough, you can head off trouble before it starts. That was my mistake right there. Thinking a person like Karen needed a reason. See, while I was getting my paperwork together and saying my goodbyes, Karen was staring at my house like it was a prize she'd already decided belonged to her. Best view on the street, bigger lot, cleaner lines. The kind of house people slow down and glance at without even knowing they're doing it. And some people, when they want something bad enough, don't ask how to earn it. They ask how to take it without getting caught. The minute I left, she got to work. Later, when my lawyer showed me the timeline, it was almost impressive in a sick way. Complaint after complaint filed against my property. Overgrown yard, even though the lawn crew was there every few days. Fence damage. On a fence that was practically brand new. Neglected exterior conditions. Unresolved compliance issues. Failure to respond. She stacked them one on top of another like bricks, building a fake record that made it look like I'd walked away from the place and left it to rot. And every notice went to the house. My empty house. So while I was halfway across the world, doing my job, letters were piling up behind my front door like little paper knives. Unopened fines. Warnings. Threats. Final notices. All part of the story she was writing about me. Absent homeowner, irresponsible resident, delinquent account. Then she took it further. She got herself a lawyer, the kind of man whose face probably looked slippery even in school pictures, and together they started twisting bylaws and filing paperwork. They pushed a foreclosure process through based on those fake HOA fines. No real challenge from the board, because Karen more or less owned that room. People on the board either trusted her, feared her, or were too lazy to ask basic questions. And that's how bad things happen, by the way. Not always with loud villains. Sometimes just with one determined liar and a bunch of cowards nodding along. The house went to a quiet auction. One bidder, a shell company. Guess who was behind it? Karen bought my home for a fraction of its value, with my own absence turned into a weapon against me. Then she erased me. That part still gets under my skin more than anything else. Not the fraud, not even the theft. It was the way she treated my life like junk left at the curb. She had a clean-out crew come through the house. Not movers. Not people packing things carefully to store them. A clean-out crew. Fast hands, trash bags, empty boxes, no care, no pause. My furniture, my clothes, my family photos, my military medals, my father's watch, the framed picture of my mother laughing in the kitchen 20 years ago. Pieces of a whole life, sold off, dumped, scattered, destroyed. Somebody threw away my memories because a woman with a title and a grudge thought my house would look better with her name attached to it. Then she listed it and sold it. A young family bought it, innocent in all this, excited, probably thinking they'd found a miracle deal in a good neighborhood. I don't blame them. I never did. They saw paperwork. They saw signatures. They saw what looked legal. That's the scary part. You know, evil doesn't always show up wearing a mask. Sometimes it comes stamped, notarized, and filed in a neat little folder. So there I was, back from 6 months away, standing on my own porch with a key that didn't work. I tried it twice, like maybe the lock had just gotten sticky. Then I knocked. A man opened the door, holding a toddler on one hip. Nice enough face. Tired eyes. Confused, same as me. I said, I think there's been some mistake. I live here. You ever say something and hear how crazy it sounds the moment it leaves your mouth? He looked at me, looked past me at the cab, then back at me. I could hear a TV somewhere inside. Smelled dinner cooking. Saw my old entryway painted a color I didn't choose. He didn't get angry. He got cautious, then embarrassed, then concerned. He brought out the paperwork. Deed transfer, sale documents, closing records. Karen's name all through it like a stain. I felt this cold wash go through me. Not panic exactly. Panic is messy. This was worse. This was that hard, quiet feeling when your brain understands something terrible before your heart can catch up. But training is training. I didn't yell, didn't shove, didn't make a scene in front of his kids. None of this was that family's fault. I told him I believed he'd been caught in the middle, and I walked back to the curb and made one phone call. Not to Karen, to Sarah. Sarah was my attorney, and if you've never met a woman who can sound calm and furious at the same time, you missed out. I explained everything. At first she thought I had to be misunderstanding something. Then I started reading names and dates off the paperwork, and I could almost hear her sit up straighter on the other end of the line. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she said real flat, Michael, don't talk to Karen. Don't touch anything. Email me every photo you took. We are about to ruin her week. Now, I already knew Sarah was sharp. What I didn't know, what Karen definitely didn't know, was that Sarah had one detail in mind that changed everything. The Service Member Civil Relief Act. If you're not familiar with it, that law exists to protect people in active duty situations from exactly this kind of predatory mess. Certain legal and financial actions, including foreclosure, cannot just be pushed through while a service member is deployed, not without proper court involvement and legal compliance. Karen either never bothered to learn that, or she thought rules only applied when she was using them on somebody else. Either way, She'd cross out HOA nonsense and straight into federal territory. Sarah moved so fast it felt like watching a row of dominoes drop in real time. She fired off letters that same day, hard letters, the kind that make people stop pretending they misunderstood the law. One went to Karen, one to Karen's lawyer, one to the title company, one to the real estate agent, one to every HOA board member whose signature or approval touched that mess. Suddenly, this wasn't some quiet little neighborhood scheme anymore. Suddenly, everybody involved had to ask themselves whether they wanted to explain to a judge how a deployed veteran somehow lost his home over fake HOA fines. Funny thing about people who swagger through a scam. They get real hard to find once the words federal violation show up in writing. The title company opened an internal investigation so fast it must have smoked. The agent who handled the sale started scrambling. Board members who'd backed Karen started acting like they barely knew her. Her lawyer, that slick little snake, began putting distance between himself and the whole operation. Nobody wanted ownership once the light got turned on. And Karen cracked. Not gracefully, not with dignity. She called, she emailed, she tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, a process issue, clerical confusion. At one point, she even tried to imply she had been protecting community standards, which is an amazing sentence to use when you've literally stolen a man's house. Court didn't buy it, not even a little. The sale was voided, deed reversed, ownership restored to me. Just like that, the legal foundation of her little empire started collapsing under her heels. But I wasn't done, and Sarah sure wasn't done. Getting the house back was the minimum. What she did cost me property, peace, time, trust, memories that could not be replaced by a check and a shrug. So we sued her. Fraud, damages, emotional distress, conversion of property. Every ugly thing she'd done got dragged into daylight and pinned there where it belonged. Receipts, timelines, false notices, forged pathways, board records, disposal records. Piece by piece, the whole rotten structure came apart. And here's where the twist got even better. Two of the very board members who'd rubber stamp her actions ended up testifying against her once they realized she had lied to them too. Turns out Karen hadn't just manipulated me. She manipulated everybody. She'd sold them the same story she sold herself, that I was absent, unreachable, irresponsible, that the house was practically abandoned, that she was heroically protecting the neighborhood. The minute they understood they'd been used as cover, they folded like lawn chairs. The judgment against her was brutal. She had to cover my legal fees. She had to pay damages for what was taken, lost, destroyed. Punitive damages, too, because the court saw the malice in it. This wasn't a paperwork accident. This was targeted, deliberate, greedy, and mean. By the time numbers stopped being added up, Karen was looking at a bill big enough to wreck the life she'd built by policing everybody else's hedges. She had to sell her own home. That part, I won't lie to you, that part felt good. But even that wasn't the end of it. Once the neighborhood found out what she'd done, she became toxic overnight. Emergency HOA meeting, full attendance, tense room. People who used to laugh at her little jokes and nod along with her speeches couldn't look at her without disgust on their faces. They voted her out unanimously. Not one hand in support. Not one. The same woman who had strutted around that cul-de-sac like she owned the sun got stripped of her title in a folding chair meeting room under fluorescent lights. There's a kind of poetry in that. The family who bought my house apologized over and over. They really were decent people. I told them the truth, which was that they'd been conned too. I even helped them connect with a good agent in a nearby neighborhood. They deserved better than to have their first home wrapped around somebody else's crime. When I finally walked back into my house after all of it, it echoed. That's what I remember most. No couch, no pictures, no dishes in the cabinet, no watch on the dresser. Just empty rooms and the sound of my own steps bouncing off walls that had seen more of my life than most people ever will. I stood there a long time, keys in my hand, looking around at what was mine and what was gone. And that's where the real lesson hit me. Not in court, not in the headlines around the neighborhood, not even when Karen lost her house. It hit me in the quiet, because what I realized is this. Some people don't just want control. They want proof that they can erase you and get away with it. They want to test whether the system bends harder for them than it protects you. And sometimes, for a little while, it does. Sometimes justice is late. Sometimes it shows up after the damage, after the theft, after the humiliation. But late is not the same as never. Karen took my house for a season. She lost her whole life trying to keep it. I rebuilt mine piece by piece, with help from the neighbors who turned out to be real, from friends who showed up, from people who still understood decency, without needing a bylaw to explain it. And Karen, last I heard, she was renting a small place across town. No board seat, no following, no power, no audience. Just another bitter woman with too much time and not enough control. You tell me, when somebody hides behind rules to do something evil, is getting your life back enough, or do they deserve to lose everything they built on the way down? And have you ever dealt with someone drunk on a little bit of power, someone who thought being in charge meant being cruel? Tell me where you draw that line. And tell me what justice ought to look like when karma finally pulls into the driveway.